From my seat, the city of Rivermount wept neon. Rain, thin as spider silk, traced patterns down the broad windows of Orpheos, blurring the streetlights into soft blooms of color. The glow bled onto the polished mahogany of my table. Number 17. My table. It was always my table. The banquette was deep, the dark leather cool against my back, and from here, I saw everything. Every entrance, every exit, every nervous glance, and every handshake that lingered a second too long. The dining room was my chessboard, and I knew the name of every piece on it. The air hummed with the low thrum of power. To my left, a city councilman was laughing too loudly with a commodities broker whose smile never quite reached his eyes. Across the room, two judges shared a bottle of Barolo, their heads bent close in conspiracy. They were all players, orbiting the quiet gravity of my presence, pretending not to notice the man whose name was a whisper in the back rooms where the city's real business was decided, Kaz Dovico, head of the Val di Pietra family. I watched them all, my senses tuned to the subtle dissonances in the room's symphony, a fork scraping a plate, a chair pushed back too quickly, the faint, sweet scent of fear that clung to a man trying to outrun his debts. It was all music to me. My wine, a Tignanello, was perfect. The air was chilled to the precise degree I preferred. The cellist in the corner played a Bach suite with a sorrowful elegance that suited the evening. Everything was in its place. A world curated for my comfort, a testament to my control. And then, the flaw? The single discordant note. The swordfish. I laid my fork and knife down, not with a crash, but with a soft, deliberate click that was somehow louder. The cello faltered for a half-beat. Conversations around me dropped in volume, the hum of the room dipping as if a vacuum had been turned on. I stared at the plate. The fish was seared beautifully on the outside, a perfect crosshatch of grill marks. But the center was translucent, cool. A mistake, a lapse in the precision I paid so handsomely for, a crack in the foundation of my world. The manager, a man named Louis, whose hands always seemed to be sweating, materialized at my elbow. He was already stammering. "Mr. Dovico, is everything all right? Is the fish not to your—" I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the plate. "Louis," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the sudden hush like a razor. "What is my one rule about this kitchen?" "Precision, sir, absolute precision." His voice was a squeak. I could see the chef, a man who prided himself on his supposed genius, peeking through the diamond-shaped window of the kitchen door, his face pale as uncooked dough. The entire room was holding its breath, waiting for the storm. They expected shouting. They expected a plate to be thrown. They didn't understand that true power doesn't need to raise its voice. I was about to dismiss Louis, to let the fear simmer and serve as a lesson, when I saw movement from the corner of my eye. It was one of the waitstaff, a girl. I'd noticed her before, only peripherally. She moved with an efficiency that was rare, a quiet purpose that set her apart from the others who bustled with nervous energy. Dark hair pulled back, a crisp black apron over a white shirt. She wasn't avoiding the tension. She was walking directly into it. "My name is Jenna Rourke, and I know how to read a room. It's part of my coursework, in a way. Threat assessment, pattern recognition, identifying the key node in a network. In my data security program at Rivermount University, we call it mapping the attack surface. Here at Orpheos, it's called surviving a Tuesday night shift. And tonight, the key node, the central server from which all the room's anxiety flowed, was Kaz Dovico at table 17. I had been watching him all night, just as he was watching everyone else. I wasn't interested in his reputation or the whispers that followed him like a shadow. I was interested in his routine, the time he arrived, the way he never sat until his back was to a solid wall, the quiet signals he gave to his men who occupied 2 other tables. It was all data, and data was my world. When the energy in the room shifted, I felt it like a drop in barometric pressure. The scrape of his silverware was a system alert. Red flag, the manager's panic shuffle. The chef's terrified face, the silence that fell over 24 conversations. It was a denial of service attack on the restaurant's composure. And I knew this was my only window. The system was vulnerable. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drum solo against the bass line of my fear. But my hands were steady as I placed the silver tray of water glasses I was holding onto a nearby service stand. Marco, one of the other servers, gave me a wild-eyed look that screamed, "Stay out of it!" But it was too late. I had spent weeks planning for an opportunity, a single moment of chaos where I could inject my own code. This was it. I walked toward table 17. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of my sensible work shoes, making me feel like I was gliding through deep water. Every eye in the room was on me. They saw a waitress, probably a new one, foolishly walking into the lion's den. They didn't see the graduate student who had spent the last 72 hours decrypting a leaked shipping manifest from a shadow corporation called the North Atlantic Cargo Union. They didn't see a woman whose entire world had narrowed to a single, desperate objective. I stopped at his table, keeping a respectful but not subservient distance. I didn't look at the offending plate of fish. I didn't look at the terrified manager. I looked directly at him. His eyes were dark, a shade of black that seemed to absorb the light, and they were fixed on me with a cold, analytical intensity. For a moment, I felt like a line of code being scanned for malware. I held my chin up. He finally spoke, his voice a low growl. "I pay for precision here." The words hung in the air, an indictment and a threat. This was the moment, the point of execution. I let out a slow, controlled breath and gave him the key. 3 words. My voice came out even, devoid of the tremor I felt in my chest, and just loud enough for him to hear. "Check your phone." The stillness in the room became absolute, as if the film had frozen in the projector. Disbelief flickered across Dovico's face, a micro-expression that I logged and filed away. It was followed by a dangerous curiosity. No one spoke to him this way. No one gave him orders. The manager looked like he was about to faint. For a long second, he just stared at me. I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, my own expression a carefully constructed mask of detached calm. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached inside his tailored suit jacket and produced a sleek, featureless black phone. His thumb moved across the screen, the light from it illuminating the hard lines of his face. I saw it then, the subtle twitch of a muscle in his jaw, the almost imperceptible widening of his eyes. A vein, thin and blue, began to pulse at his temple, a living wire carrying a surge of sudden, violent understanding. He knew. He was watching the video I had routed to him through 3 ghost servers and a compromised satellite uplink. He was watching his most trusted lieutenant, Silas Greco, standing on the wet concrete of Pier 9, shaking hands with a man from a rival family as his men loaded unmarked crates onto their truck. He was watching his empire being sold out from under him, in real time. His gaze snapped back to me. The anger over the fish was gone, replaced by something far colder, far more lethal. The question was there, unspoken but screaming in the silence between us. "Who are you? How did you do this?" I gave a slight, almost imperceptible dip of my head, the barest minimum of a bow. I leaned in just enough for my words to be for him alone, though the whole room strained to hear them. "If you want your dinner done right," I murmured, my voice a blade wrapped in silk, "you need to know who's putting ashes in your kitchen." And with that, I turned and walked away, picking up my tray of water glasses as if nothing had happened. Behind me, I heard a collective, quiet exhale as the restaurant began to breathe again. The spell was broken. But as I moved through the tables, I could still feel his eyes on my back. A connection had been made, a circuit completed. 2 worlds, his of brutal order and mine of invisible information, had just collided with the force of a thunderclap, and neither would ever be the same. I pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, and the wall of noise and heat hit me like a physical blow. The quiet, deadly theater of the dining room vanished, replaced by the clatter of pans, the roar of the exhaust fans, and the sharp, staccato shouts of the chefs. My adrenaline-laced calm held for exactly 3 more seconds before my knees felt weak. I leaned against a cool, stainless steel counter, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My hands, which had been so steady, now had a fine tremor I couldn't control. Marco, a prep cook with kind eyes and a perpetual dusting of flour on his eyebrows, sidled up to me, his voice a low hiss under the kitchen symphony. "Jenna, what in God's name did you do, Louis? Looks like he's about to have a heart attack. Everyone's talking." I forced a thin smile, my eyes scanning the kitchen, ensuring no one else was listening. "I just delivered a message. A message to Kaz Doviko." "Are you insane?" he whispered, his hands busy chopping parsley with frantic energy. "People don't deliver messages to him. They deliver his food, and they pray they got it right." I straightened up, pulling the mask of composure back over my face. The fish was undercooked. I said a half-truth that sounded ridiculous even to me. I couldn't tell him the real reason. I couldn't tell anyone. The real reason was a ghost named Maeve, my sister. 11 weeks ago. She had vanished, not a runaway, not a simple missing persons case. She was a volunteer, bright and full of a naive, fierce desire to do good in the world. Her last known location was an event hosted by something called the Echelon Wellness Foundation, a charity that seemed too slick, too well funded. My digging, my late nights spent burrowing through firewalls and tracing dark web data packets, led me down a rabbit hole that ended in a cold, dark place, the North Atlantic Cargo Union, a legitimate shipping company that was anything but. Their refrigerated warehouses were a black hole on the city's grid, and every whisper, every encrypted file, tied them to one man, Kaz Doviko. So I got a job at Orfeo's. It was his sanctuary, his office, the men he met with, their key cards, their phones, they were all here, with a custom-built skimmer the size of a sugar packet. I could clone a card with a simple brush past, with a proximity sniffer. I could map the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth chatter. I was building a database, a network map of his entire operation, searching for one single access point, one mention of a warehouse that might hold my sister. I wasn't trying to burn his kingdom down. I was just looking for a door. A vibration from the burner phone in my apron pocket jolted me. I pulled it out under the cover of the counter. An anonymous encrypted message. Just 5 words. "Don't trust Greco. Tonight's shipment is bad." The tip confirmed my gamble. The video feed of Silas Greco at Pier 9 wasn't just a lucky find, it was a targeted leak. Someone else wanted Greco out of the picture, and they were using me, and by extension Doviko, to do it. Just then, one of Doviko's men appeared at the kitchen door. It was built like a refrigerator, with a face that looked like it had been used to stop pucks. He didn't look at the chef or the staff. His eyes found me instantly. "Mister, Doviko wants to see you. Back alley, now." The kitchen fell silent. Marco's knife stopped mid-chop. The fear was back, thick and suffocating. But this time, it was mixed with something else, a flicker of hope. The system had accepted my input. Now it was time to see the output. The moment the waitress, Jenna, Louis had squeaked her name, walked away, my mind was already working 3 steps ahead. My anger over the fish had evaporated, a petty grievance in the face of monumental betrayal. Silas Greco, my right hand, the man I'd trusted like a brother for 15 years. The image from the phone was burned into my memory. Silas smiling, shaking hands with Nico Vario, the underboss of the Navarro line, my most bitter rivals. It was a declaration of war, delivered to me on a silver platter by a waitress with eyes that held no fear. My first command was silent, a flick of my gaze to my man, Dante, at the door. He understood. The back alley would be secured. The kitchen staff would see nothing. My second command was to Louis. "The meal is concluded. Bring the check." I needed the room cleared of peripheral players. My third thought was the girl, Jenna, she wasn't a pawn. Pawns don't deliver checkmate. She was a player from a board I didn't recognize. The video feed was professional-grade stable. Clear audio, time-stamped. It came from inside my own network. Who was she working for? The FOCB had been sniffing around my operations for years, a pack of well-dressed wolves who could never find a way into the sheep pen. They were smart, but they weren't this subtle. This felt different, more personal. I walked through the now emptying restaurant and out the service door into the alley. The rain was heavier now, slicking the asphalt and drumming a hard rhythm on the metal dumpsters. Dante was there, a silent statue under an awning, and she was there, standing in the middle of the alley, her arms crossed against the chill, her face illuminated by the red neon glow of the restaurant's sign. She wasn't trying to run. She was waiting for me. I stopped a few feet from her, pulling a cigarette from my case and lighting it. The flame danced in the damp air before catching. I took a long drag, the smoke a ghost in the rain. "You have 5 minutes," I said, my voice flat. "Tell me why." She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Someone in your house is selling you out piece by piece. Silas Greco is just the first cut, the deepest." I didn't ask what. I asked why. Who sent you? "No one sent me," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I found a loose thread, and I pulled on it." I took another drag from the cigarette, studying her. She was young, but there was an oldness in her eyes, a weariness that didn't fit. She was hiding something. The motive, the personal stake. People didn't take risks like this for abstract reasons. I decided to apply some pressure to see if she'd crack. I pulled a folded document from my inside pocket. It was a prop, a file Dante's people had mocked up in an hour, a criminal record for a Jenna Rourke. Shoplifting, possession, all fake. I held it out to her. "This says you have a history of making trouble, that you're unreliable, that you might even be trying to set me up, playing both sides." She glanced at the paper, her eyes scanning the text for less than a second before meeting mine again. There was no flicker of fear, no flash of indignation, nothing. She just stared at me, her expression unreadable. "That's not me," she said simply. The lack of protest, the sheer disinterest, told me more than a denial would have. She knew it was a fake, she knew it was a test, and she was calling my bluff. A fragile respect began to form in the space between us. She had nerve, and she had information. A deal needed to be made. "You've shown me a problem," I said, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under my heel. "Now give me a solution. A piece of it. At least something tangible." "You want a gesture of good faith?" she asked, a hint of steel in her voice. "I want a reason not to have Dante put you in a car and find out everything you know in a place much less pleasant than this alley." She didn't even glance at my man. Her focus was entirely on me. "There's a shipment moving tonight, the one Greco was arranging. It's medical supplies. According to the manifest, it's not." She recited a license plate number from memory. A blue Kenworth truck, leaving from the south gate of the port in 40 minutes. "It will be your proof." It was a good piece, verifiable, actionable. And in return, I asked, "What do you want?" "The chef," she said. And for the first time, her composure seemed to soften. "Your anger tonight. It wasn't his fault. Don't let him pay the price for Greco's mess. He has a family." Of all the things she could have asked for money, protection, a favor, she asked for mercy for a stranger. It was an unexpected move, disarming. "He's safe." I said, "It was a small price to pay." She nodded, the transaction complete. She turned to leave, to walk out of the alley and back into the rainy city night. As she passed under a flickering security light, her silhouette stark against the wet brick, I saw something else. In her defiance, in the calculated risk she had just taken to expose a traitor. I saw myself, 20 years ago. A younger man who had trusted the wrong person, who had learned the hard way that loyalty was a commodity, not a virtue. That lesson had cost me dearly, and it had been paid for in blood. Jenna Rourke disappeared into the rain-streaked darkness, a ghost slipping back into the machine. I stood there for a long moment, the rain cold on my face, the betrayal a hot coal in my gut. Dante moved from the shadows. "Boss, what do we do about her?" I turned, my mind already calculating the fallout, the necessary moves to cauterize this wound, but my last thought was of the girl, the key. "Don't touch her," I ordered, my voice quiet but absolute. "Find that truck, but the girl, she's off limits, for now." The air coming off the water at Mercer Key was cold and sharp, smelling of salt, diesel, and the deep, metallic scent of fish. From the driver's seat of my beat-up sedan parked 2 blocks away, I watched the ambush unfold on a digital map I'd built myself. The blue Kenworth truck, the one with the license plate I'd given Kaz Dovico, was a blinking red dot moving through a grid of gray warehouses. My laptop screen was a mosaic of data streams. One window showed the raw packet data I was pulling from a microsensor I'd managed to stick to the truck's chassis as it passed an intersection earlier. Another translated that data into a real-time temperature reading from its refrigeration unit. It was too cold for medical supplies, perfect for something else. My world had become a cramped car, the glow of a screen and the low, constant hum of a processor working overtime. My heart hammered a frantic, syncopated rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't a simulation. This wasn't a class project. The men I could see on a grainy, pirated security feed, taking positions behind stacks of rusted lobster pots and old shipping containers, were not pixels. They were Dovico's people. And the men in the truck were walking into a trap I had helped set, for Maeve. Everything was for Maeve. I saw the truck slow as it approached the designated transfer point, a slick, dark patch on the asphalt, almost invisible in the rain-swept darkness, gleamed under a security light. Oil? A simple, effective classic. My geofencing alert pinged softly. Target in zone. I held my breath. The night exploded. From my perch in the shadows of a crane, I watched the Kenworth lumber into the kill zone. The rain was a curtain, my men ghosts within it. I felt the cold grip of the pistol in my hand. A familiar weight. This was my world. Controlled, precise, and unforgiving. The girl, Jenna, had given me the target. My men had planned the strike, but the rage was all mine. It was a cold, clean fire fueled by Silas Greco's betrayal. He wouldn't be in the truck. He was too smart for that, but his men, his product, his profit, that I could touch, that I could burn. The first shot was not from us. It came from a rooftop across the quay, a high-velocity crack that was utterly alien to the handguns my men carried. A flock of gulls nesting on a warehouse roof erupted into the night sky, a panic constellation of white against the storm clouds. The driver of the Kenworth slammed on the brakes. The massive truck hit the oil slick, its tires hissing as they lost their grip. For a moment, it was a graceful, terrible ballet as the trailer swung wide, skidding in a slow, groaning arc before jackknifing with a scream of tortured metal against the side of a container. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from 3 different directions, none of them ours. My men were pinned down, caught in a crossfire. It was a trap. Greco hadn't just sold me out to the Navarros, he'd set me up to be wiped out by a third party. The raw, sickening realization hit me. Greco wanted me gone, permanently. I felt a line of fire sear across my left bicep. The force of it spun me half around, my arm suddenly numb and useless. I dropped behind a low concrete barrier, the impact jarring my teeth. Blood, hot and slick, soaked the sleeve of my jacket. I was exposed, I was wounded, and my trusted lieutenant had led me here to die. My carefully constructed digital world shattered. Through the low-res security feed, I saw him go down. Kaz Dovico. He spun and dropped out of my camera's line of sight. My breath hitched. My plan, my entire desperate gamble, hinged on him being in control, on him being the monster everyone thought he was. A wounded monster was just a target. Without thinking, I was out of the car. My legs were moving before my brain could register the insanity of it. The sound of the gunfight was deafening now, a physical presence that battered the air. I ran, my secondhand sneakers slipping on the wet pavement, my focus narrowed to the concrete barrier where I'd last seen him. He was the only person who had the connections, the power, to find the North Atlantic Cargo Union's hidden ledgers. He was my only way to Maeve. I would not let him die. I slid the last 10 feet on my knees, the rough asphalt tearing through my jeans. He was there, slumped against the concrete, his face pale, his left arm drenched in blood. His eyes, when they found mine, were wide with shock. "What the hell are you doing here?" he gritted out, trying to push himself up. "Saving my investment," I snapped back, my hands already moving, unbuckling the thick leather belt from his trousers. "Don't be stubborn, boss." I looped the belt high up on his arm, pulling it brutally tight, using a stray piece of rebar to twist it into a makeshift windlass. He let out a sharp hiss of pain, but didn't fight me. His eyes weren't on me anymore. They were scanning the battlefield, his mind working, analyzing. "Greco's not here," and he said, his voice a low rasp. "He was never coming. This was for me." "They're flanking us," I said, my voice quiet, urgent. Heavy boots were crunching on gravel, getting closer. "We have to move. Now." I grabbed his good arm, pulling him to his feet. He was heavy, a dead weight for a moment before his legs found their strength. I half-dragged, half-guided him toward a dark opening between two towering stacks of shipping containers. It was a cavern of steel, smelling of rust and cold seawater. I found the heavy locking bar on one of the container doors and shoved it open, pushing him inside before following and sliding the heavy bolt home. We were plunged into near-total darkness. The only sounds were our own ragged breaths and the frantic, terrified thumping of my heart. Outside, I could hear shouting, the scrape of boots on pavement as they swept the area. They were looking for us. Her touch was a shock of warmth against my skin. Her efficiency, her sheer lack of panic in the middle of a firefight was astounding. Now, in the cold, echoing dark of this steel box, I could feel her presence beside me, a small, determined flame against the encroaching darkness. My arm throbbed, a deep, pulsating ache, but my mind was clear. "You took a hell of a risk," I said, my voice rough. "So did you," she countered, her voice just a breath in the dark. "You trusted my information. It seems your information was incomplete. Or it was a trap meant for both of us." I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "We need to trade, now, before they find us." "Trade what?" "I need information," she said, her voice tight with an urgency that went beyond our current situation. "A shell corporation, the Echelon Wellness Foundation. What do you know about it?" Echelon. The name was a whisper in certain circles, a high-end charity, supposedly rumored to be a front for moving things and people that needed to stay off the grid, a Navarro-backed operation. "It's a snake pit," I said. "Humanitarian awards on the front page, human misery in the fine print. Why?" "That's my business. Now, your turn. You want to know who gave me the video of Greco?" "I do," I said, the word edged with ice. "I can't give you a name. It was a dead drop through a secure server. But I can give you the raw data packet. It's encrypted, but the source routing protocols are sloppy. You can trace it back. It's on a drive in my pocket." A drive in her pocket. She had walked into my restaurant, into my life, carrying the key to my kingdom's greatest treachery. The audacity of it was breathtaking. "All right," I said. The boots outside were getting closer. "There's a warehouse, SD-14. It's one of Echelon's primary intake facilities on the west side. That's your information. Now give me the drive." I felt her shift beside me, the faint click of a tiny USB drive being placed into my hand. Her fingers brushed mine. And a jolt, completely separate from the pain in my arm or the adrenaline in my veins, shot through me. It was the spark of a dangerous, unspoken alliance. Suddenly, the night was split by sirens. Not the low growl of the local police, but the high, piercing shriek of federal vehicles. Red and blue lights flashed through the small gaps in the container door, painting frantic stripes across our faces. "FOCB," she breathed, her voice laced with a new kind of dread. "They're too early, way too early." She was right. The feds moved like glaciers. A response to a shootout like this should have taken them 20 minutes, minimum. They were here in 5. They'd been waiting. It was another layer of the trap. Greco didn't just have Navarro on his payroll. He had someone inside the Federal Organized Crime Bureau, a special unit. I'd heard whispers. The Aegis Task Force, known for their aggressive tactics and their uncanny ability to be in the right place at the wrong time. The boots outside were retreating, replaced by the organized, authoritative shouts of federal agents. We were trapped between the wolves and the so-called shepherds. "There's another way," I said, my mind racing. Accessing the blueprints of this port that I knew like the back of my hand, I moved to the back of the container, my hand finding a maintenance latch I knew was there. "Stay close." The latch opened onto a narrow catwalk. Below us, the dark water of the quay churned. Above, a heavy-duty cargo zipline, used for moving nets and equipment, stretched across the slip to the roof of a fish processing plant on the other side. It was insane. It was our only shot. "You first," I said, grabbing the heavy steel pulley. I didn't hesitate. I clipped the pulley onto the thick, greasy cable and grabbed hold, my feet leaving the platform. For a terrifying second, I was suspended in the air, the wind and rain whipping at me. Then gravity caught, and I was flying through the darkness. The city a blur of distant, indifferent lights. The cable groaned and vibrated under the strain, a single, deep note, played on a steel guitar string against the backdrop of the storm. I hit the far roof with a jarring thud, stumbling but staying on my feet. A moment later, he landed beside me, his larger frame making the whole roof shudder. We collapsed onto the wet tin, hidden from view, the sirens a frantic chorus below. For a long moment, we just lay there, gasping for air, our chests heaving. The rain washed over us, cold and cleansing, and then a sound I never expected. A small, breathless laugh escaped my lips. It was a laugh born of pure, unadulterated terror and the giddy relief of survival. I looked over at him. In the faint, ambient light of the city, I saw the hard lines of his face soften. A slow, tired smile touched his lips. The mob boss, the king, was gone. In his place was just a man, wounded and betrayed, lying on a tin roof in the rain. We had seen behind each other's masks. We had survived the same fire. He pushed himself up onto his good elbow, his dark eyes holding mine. The intensity was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't the cold analysis of a predator. It was the steady, focused gaze of an equal. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the patter of the rain. 11 a.m., the Hearth and Kettle Cafe on Elm. I owe you coffee, and the truth. I arrived first. The Hearth and Kettle was a small place, tucked between a bookstore and an antique shop, the kind of establishment that survived on regulars and the quality of its coffee. The windows were steamy, blurring the gray, rain-soaked world outside into a watercolor painting. I chose a booth in the back corner, the same way I chose my table at Orfeo's back to the wall, a clear view of the door, old habits. I took off my long coat, the fabric still damp, and laid it on the seat beside me, a barrier between me and the rest of the room. The sleeve of my shirt was rolled up, exposing the clean, white bandage on my bicep. A dull ache was a constant reminder of the night before, a reminder of the betrayal that had set this meeting in motion. I was nursing a black coffee when she walked in. The small bell above the door chimed softly. Her hair was dark with rain, clinging to her temples and the nape of her neck. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, and for a moment, she looked like any other college student seeking refuge from the weather. But then she saw me, and the look in her eyes was anything but ordinary. It was the same look she'd had in the alley, the same look she'd had on the rooftop, a steady, unnerving focus that cut through all pretense. She slid into the booth opposite me, her movements economical and quiet. She didn't apologize for being late, and I hadn't expected her to. Punctuality seemed like a trivial concern for someone who operated in her world of data and shadows. She ordered a black tea from the passing waitress, her eyes never leaving mine. "The truth," she said, her voice low. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I'm a man of my word. But you first. The Echelon Wellness Foundation. You didn't just pull that name out of a hat. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in her gaze, a deep, profound pain that she quickly masked. She reached into her bag and slid a photograph across the table. It was worn at the edges, the way a picture is when it's been handled 1,000 times. It showed two girls, smiling, their arms around each other. One of them was a younger Jenna. The other girl wore a bright blue polo shirt with a logo embroidered on the chest, a stylized E that I recognized instantly, Echelon. "Her name is Maeve," Jenna said, and her voice was different now, stripped of its hard, analytical edge, leaving only a raw, vulnerable core. "She's my sister. She went missing 11 weeks ago. She was a volunteer for them. She thought she was helping people." I looked from the smiling girl in the photo to the woman sitting across from me, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. The desperation, the insane risk she had taken at the restaurant, the way she had run into a gunfight to save a man she barely knew. It wasn't about money or power. It was about love. It was about a lost sister. "I'm sorry," I said. The words felt inadequate, hollow, but I meant them. She simply nodded, accepting the sentiment for what it was, and slid the photo back into her bag, the shield returning to its place. "Now you," she said, "why is your most trusted man working with the people who took my sister?" My story was shorter, less noble. The Valdipietra name is old. My father and his father built an empire on things that thrive in the dark: smuggling, gambling, protection. When I took over, I started moving us out of that world. It's slow, it's expensive, and it's dangerous. You can't just walk away. You have to untangle yourself, thread by thread. I leaned forward, my voice dropping lower. I've been building legitimate businesses, logistics, real estate. But to do that, you have to cut the old ties. That means less money for men who are used to easy cash. Men like Silas Greco. He doesn't like the new direction. He doesn't want to go clean. So he made a new friend, the Navarro line. They're happy to stay in the dark, and their favorite front for moving product and people is the Echelon Wellness Foundation. The truth hung in the air between us, ugly and complicated. She had her motive, I had mine, and in the middle was a tangled knot of betrayal and corruption that was strangling us both. I knew he was a monster. The city whispered his name like a prayer and a curse, but sitting across from him in the quiet warmth of the coffee shop, he just looked like a man, a tired, wounded man. When he told me about his plan to legitimize his family's business, I didn't see a crime lord trying to rebrand. I saw a man trying to escape a cage that had been built for him generations ago. His truth didn't absolve him, but it did make him understandable. And it made Silas Greco's actions perfectly logical. Greco was a creature of the old world, and Kaz was trying to drag him into the light. "It's worse than you think," I said, pulling my tablet from my bag. I slid it across the table to him, an image already on the screen. It was a shipping route map I had pieced together from dozens of fragmented data logs. Echelon hosts these wellness retreats offshore. The attendees are brought in, then transferred to refrigerated containers owned by the North Atlantic Cargo Union, your company. From there, they're moved to inland ports, disguised as cargo for therapeutic massage centers. It's a supply chain. Maeve isn't just missing. She's inventory. He stared at the screen, his jaw tight, the muscle there pulsing. He traced the route with his finger, his expression grim. He was seeing the rot inside his own house, the way his assets, his routes, his people were being used for something so vile. He was seeing the parts of his empire that he hadn't been able to clean yet. Without a word, he took the tablet and tapped the screen a few times. He was fast. his fingers moving with a surprising dexterity. When he slid it back to me, the route map was gone. In its place was a schematic, a detailed map of a dozen warehouses and storage facilities dotted across the city's industrial zones. Each one was labeled with a code. "These are my private warehouses," he said, his voice a low growl. "The ones that are off the books, the ones Greco might use. That's a temporary access key. It will give you 72 hours of full digital access to their security networks. Cameras, door logs, everything. Find out if your sister is in one of my buildings." I stared at the screen, my throat suddenly tight. This was more than information. This was the heart of his operation. He was making himself vulnerable to me in a way I never thought possible. It was a profound, terrifying act of trust. I reached for the tablet, and as I took it, my fingers brushed against his. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot up my arm. It was like touching a live wire. The low hum of the espresso machine faded away. The clatter of dishes, the quiet conversations around us, it all disappeared. There was only the warmth of his skin against mine and the sudden, frantic beat of my own heart. I saw his eyes widen almost imperceptibly, his breath catch. We both froze, caught in that tiny, electric moment. I pulled my hand back as if burned, my face flushing. I cleared my throat, forcing myself to refocus. "I have a condition," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted. "If I find her, if Maeve is in any one of those places, you open the gates. No questions, no delays. You get your people out of my way." "Done," he said without hesitation. "But I have a condition of my own. When we find Greco, when we corner him, you stay back. You stand clear of the firing line. He's my blood, my betrayal. I will handle him according to the old laws." His eyes were dark, promising a kind of justice that wouldn't be found in any courtroom. "Agreed," I said. "We were partners. For now." Just then, two men walked past the cafe's front window. They were big men in long coats, their faces hard and emotionless. They didn't look in, but their presence was a cold draft in the warm room. I recognized them from the files I'd compiled Navarro enforcers. Kaz saw them too, in one smooth, fluid motion. He stood up and slid into my side of the booth, forcing me to press back against the wall. He picked up his coat and draped it over the back of the seat, creating a screen. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. He had placed his body between me and the door, a living shield. It was instinctual, possessive, and deeply protective. It also made me feel like a porcelain doll. I leaned in close, my lips almost brushing his ear, my breath warm against his skin. I felt him tense. "I can protect myself," I whispered, my voice a blade. He didn't turn to look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the street outside, watching until the two men had passed. Then he gave the slightest of nods. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect. It was the moment I stopped being a pawn or an asset. It was the moment he let me stand beside him, not behind him. He slid back to his side of the booth, the space between us now charged with a new, unspoken understanding. "We need to draw him out," I said, my voice steady again. "Force him to make a mistake." "He thinks I'm wounded, weakened," Kaz mused. His eyes distant. "He thinks he has the upper hand. He'll get arrogant. So we give him a stage to perform on." I finished, the plan crystallizing in my mind. Somewhere he feels safe. Somewhere you can control. His eyes met mine, and a slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. "Orpheos," he said. "We'll invite him to a reconciliation dinner, to forgive and forget. And when he shows up," I said, my own smile matching his, "we'll serve him his last meal." The Blackstrand Lighthouse was an old soldier, standing guard on a spit of rock that jutted out into the angry Atlantic. It was the last place anyone would look for me. The wind was a physical thing here, a raw, relentless force that slammed against the iron railings of the watch deck and screamed around the stone tower. This was a place on the edge of the world, and tonight, I felt like I was standing on the edge of my own. I sat on a wooden crate inside the lantern room. the massive Fresnel lens turning silently above us, its intricate glasswork a cathedral of light. The first aid kit was open on my lap. I had managed to clean the wound on my arm, but trying to bandage it with one hand was proving impossible. The gauze kept slipping in my clumsy fingers. "Here," a quiet voice said. Jenna knelt in front of me. She took the roll of gauze and antiseptic wipe from my hand. Her expression was a strange, unreadable mixture of the firm resolve I'd come to recognize and a flicker of genuine concern. Her touch, when it came, was surprisingly gentle. She worked with the same quiet efficiency she displayed on the floor of Orpheos, her fingers cleaning the edges of the wound with a light, sure pressure that barely caused a sting. I watched her, my own hands lying useless in my lap. I was not a man who was used to being cared for. I was not a man who was used to being still. Yet, I did not move. I did not pull away. "You're lucky," she murmured, her eyes focused on her work. "It went clean through. An inch to the right and it would have hit bone." "Luck had nothing to do with it," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "It was a warning shot, meant to wound, not to kill. Greco wants me off the board, but he wants the Navarros to do the dirty work so he can take over with clean hands." She began to wrap the clean gauze around my bicep, her movements precise and practiced. Her proximity was unnerving. I could smell the faint scent of rain and tea on her, a clean, earthy fragrance that was a stark contrast to the salt and iron of the lighthouse. I could see the fine, dark lashes that framed her intelligent eyes, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. In this small, protected space, with the storm raging outside and the silent, powerful light turning above, the world shrank to just the two of us. My name is Jenna Rourke, and I was wrapping a bandage around the arm of one of the most dangerous men in the city. The absurdity of it was not lost on me. Every instinct, every piece of data my brain had ever processed told me to run. Kazdovico was not safe. He was the storm, not the shelter yet. As my fingers brushed against the warm, solid skin of his arm, I felt no fear, only a strange, grounding sense of purpose. I was exactly where I needed to be. When I finished, my hands lingered for a moment on the clean white bandage. I looked up and met his eyes. The gratitude there was unspoken, but it was present. A quiet, startling warmth in their dark depths. The wind howled, rattling the thick glass of the lantern room, and I shivered, a sudden chill running through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. He seemed to notice. Without a word, he reached for a heavy wool blanket that was folded on a nearby bench. He shook it out, and the scent of salt and old wool filled the air. He didn't just hand it to me. He draped it over my shoulders, then sat down beside me on the crate, pulling the other end over himself. The space between us disappeared, under the coarse fabric. His body was a wall of heat against the cold. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the roar of the waves crashing against the rocks below, watching the powerful beam of light sweep across the churning, black water. The words, when they came, felt pulled from a place deeper than thought. "I'm afraid," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper against the wind. "Not of them, not of Greco or the Navarros." I turned my head to look at him, our faces just inches apart in the dim, rhythmic light. "I'm afraid of what it means to stand next to you, to help you. It feels like embracing every enemy you've ever made." I expected him to dismiss it, to offer some empty platitude about strength or courage. He did not. He looked out at the tumultuous sea, his profile carved from stone by the sweeping light. "I have worn this crown of thorns my entire life," he said, his voice a low rumble, heavy with a weariness that seemed ancient. "It was placed on my head the day I was born. For years, I just tried to wear it without letting the thorns pierce my skull, but it's not enough." He finally turned to look at me, and in his eyes, I saw a profound, aching hunger. "I want to take it off. I want to build something that doesn't need to live in the shadows. Something that can be judged by a group like the Metropolitan Integrity Commission and not be found wanting. Something clean. He let out a long, slow breath. Greco thinks I'm going soft. He thinks I'm betraying our legacy. The truth is, I'm just trying to survive it. His confession was a key, unlocking a part of him I never expected to see. The man who ruled a criminal empire wanted nothing more than to be free of it. He wasn't just a monster. He was a prisoner. And in that moment, the last of my reservations, the last of my carefully constructed walls, crumbled into dust. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside him, the one he had been fighting alone for years. The space between us became charged, the air thick with unspoken things. The rhythmic sweep of the light illuminated his face, then plunged it into shadow, then illuminated it again. I saw the question in his eyes, the silent, hesitant request. He wasn't a man who asked for permission, but he was asking now. I gave him my answer with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. I did not. The first touch of his lips was tentative, soft, tasting of coffee and salt in the storm outside. It was not a kiss of possession or dominance. It was a kiss of discovery, a quiet, searching question. My hand came up to cup his jaw, my thumb stroking the rough stubble there, and I answered his question by deepening the kiss, by tilting my head to meet his more fully. His good arm came around my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us at all. His other hand, the wounded one, came to rest gently on my cheek, his touch infinitely careful. It was a kiss that spoke of shared loneliness, of finding an unexpected anchor in a raging sea. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs, its rhythm matching the powerful, steady thump of his against my chest. His breath hitched, a small, vulnerable sound that seemed to pull all the air from the room. I was the one who broke the kiss, pulling back just enough to rest my forehead against his. We stayed like that, breathing the same air, our eyes closed, the world reduced to this single point of contact. The raw power of his body was a tangible thing, but for the first time, I felt the fierce control he held over it, the gentle way he held me, as if I were something precious he was afraid of breaking. He pulled me closer still, a low, reassuring murmur in his chest. I felt his lips against my temple. There, under the blanket, in the heart of the lighthouse, I felt a sense of safety that was completely illogical, yet utterly undeniable. It was a trust built not on words, but on shared survival, on a glimpse into the truths hidden beneath the surface. The night was cold, but I was warm. The world was dangerous, but in his arms, I felt anchored. The raw touch of his skin, the quiet sound of his breathing mixed with the crashing waves. The intimacy was not in any grand gesture, but in this quiet, shared stillness. "Tomorrow," he whispered, his voice a gravelly promise against my hair. "We go back to Orfeo's. You're going to walk up to my table." He pulled back so he could look me in the eye, his gaze intense. "And you are going to say those 3 words again. Check your phone. And this time, every traitor in that room will show their hand." The plan was audacious, dangerous. It was a performance on the grandest stage, with our lives as the price of failure. But looking at him, feeling the solid strength of his arm around me, I was not afraid. I nodded. "Okay," I breathed. The powerful beam of the lighthouse swept past our window, a blade of pure white light cutting through the darkness, illuminating the two of us, wrapped in a single blanket, a single silhouette. For a moment, we were no longer part of the storm. We were the calm at its very center. The message arrived on my burner phone at 3 a.m, a single, jarring vibration that pulled me from a shallow, restless sleep. There were no words, just an image. My blood went cold. It was Maeve. She was wearing a crisp, dark blue echelon jacket, her hair pulled back neatly. She was holding up an ID card that read "Event Staff." Her smile was the one she always used for pictures, a little forced, a little tired at the edges, but it was her. She was alive. My mind, trained for this, immediately ignored the emotional tidal wave and went to work. I plugged the phone into my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard, running the decryption script I'd written for just this purpose. The image was a breadcrumb, deliberately left for me. The metadata was a mess, intentionally corrupted, but not perfectly. There were fragments, ghosts of data in the file's hex code, a partial GPS tag, a cellular tower triangulation signature, weak and bouncing off the water. I cross-referenced the fragments with Rivermount city maps and Port Authority schedules. It all pointed to one place, the eastward pier, and the signature's weakness, the specific type of signal degradation. It was consistent with being transmitted from inside a large steel structure, a ship, the middle decks most likely, where the signal would have to fight its way through multiple layers of the hull. My eyes scanned the berthing schedules. A single name stood out, a luxury yacht chartered for a massive echelon fundraiser the following night, the Glasswing. They were hiding her in plain sight. The reconciliation dinner at Orfeo's was a masterclass in tension. The air, usually humming with the quiet confidence of the powerful, was now stretched thin, vibrating with unspoken threats. From my position near the service station, I watched the players take their seats at table 17. Kaz was at the head, a picture of calm authority, his bandaged arm a subtle reminder of the violence that simmered just beneath the surface. Silas Greco sat to his right, his face a mask of earnest loyalty. He clasped Kaz's good shoulder, his voice full of feigned concern. It was a flawless performance, too flawless. His eyes, however, were never still. They flickered around the room, cataloging the exits, noting who was watching, and they landed on me a beat too long every time I passed the table. He knew I was part of this. He just didn't know how. In my ear, a tiny, flesh-colored receiver fed me a low hiss of static. The open channel to Kaz's men stationed outside, I was the central node, a ghost in an apron. My eyes and ears extending beyond the walls of the restaurant, my job was simple: serve the wine, watch, and listen. But as I moved through the room, my tablet, which I used for taking orders, was also running a passive network sniffer in the background. A faint but persistent signal pinged on my screen, a data packet leaking from a source inside the restaurant. It was heavily encrypted, but its signature was familiar. It was the same protocol used by the Aegis Task Force, the FOCB. They had someone in the room. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. We were in a three-way standoff, and I had a sickening feeling that Greco and the feds were on the same side. We were walking into a trap set on the top of our own. The wine was my cue. Kaz began the conversation, a verbal chess match played with vintages and vineyards. "Silas," Kaz began, swirling a deep red liquid in his glass, a toast to loyalty. "I thought we'd open something special, a Cheval Blanc, from a very specific year, the year we took control of the North Pier." He held Greco's gaze, his own eyes like chips of obsidian, a bold move. Some said reckless, but we made it our own. Greco smiled, raising his glass. "A vintage year. Kaz, we were a good team, unbeatable." "And then," Kaz continued, gesturing for me to pour another bottle, "there was the Margot, complex, difficult, reminds me of the trouble we had down at the fisheries. So many competing interests. So easy for a shipment to get misdirected. Each bottle was a question, each name, a veiled accusation, a port, a deal. A moment where loyalty had been tested. Greco parried every thrust with a smooth anecdote, a shared memory, reinforcing his position as the faithful soldier. My moment came with dessert. The chef, his hands shaking slightly, placed the delicate chocolate mousse on my tray. Tucked into the piped cream at the base of the dish was a single, perfect raspberry, and beneath it, something no one could see, a paper-thin NFC chip, programmed with a single, aggressive command. I approached the table, my heart hammering. "Compliments of the chef. Mr. Greco," I said, my voice even. I placed the dessert on the table, letting the edge of the plate slide to within half an inch of Greco's phone, which lay beside his wine glass. For a fraction of a second, the plate and the phone were in the perfect position. A tiny green light on my tablet, tucked under my arm, blinked once. It was done. The chip had activated, forcing a handshake with his phone and initiating a full data clone to a secure cloud server I controlled. In 15 minutes, I would have everything: his contacts, his messages, his location history, his betrayal, itemized and recorded. As I turned from the table, I caught the eye of Louis, the manager. Earlier in the night, I had seen one of Greco's men corner him in the pantry, his face pale with fear, and he was being squeezed. I'd found him moments later, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. "There's a delivery issue in cold storage," I had told him quietly. "You should go down and supervise it personally in about an hour. Don't come back up until you get an all clear from the chef." He had just stared at me, but he understood. I was giving him a way out before the storm broke. Greco was feeling confident now, expansive. He and Kaz were reminiscing, and in his arrogance, he made a mistake. "It's all about logistics, Kaz. You taught me that," he said, laughing. "Like this echelon fundraiser tomorrow. A nightmare. Getting all the staff and high-value volunteers moved onto the glass wing without a hitch. It takes a delicate touch." He said it so casually, but for me, the world stopped. Volunteers on the glass wing, Maeve. My hand tightened on my serving tray, the metal digging into my palm. I forced myself to breathe, to keep the mask of the invisible waitress in place. He had just confirmed it. He had just signed his own death warrant. My focus returned to Kaz. His face was unreadable, but I knew he had heard it too. He had seen my micro-reaction. He subtly changed the subject, turning the conversation to old rivalries. "The Navarros are getting bold," he said, a deliberate note of weariness in his voice, "spreading themselves thin, trying to pick at our edges." He took a sip of water. In his ear, a device identical to mine would be picking up his words. He was no longer just talking to Greco. He was giving orders. "Maybe we're overextended, pulling our people back from the district markets, from the smaller port operations. Maybe it's time to consolidate, show a little weakness to draw out the real snakes." It was the bait, a feigned retreat. He was making a public show of pulling back his forces, a calculated move to make the Navarro family think the Val di Pietra were vulnerable, wounded by internal conflict. He was inviting them to strike, to focus their resources on the wrong targets, leaving the way clear for us tomorrow night. The dinner ended with handshakes and false promises. Greco left smiling, believing he had won, that his old boss suspected nothing. The federal agents in the room had their notes, but they had no real evidence. They had all watched the play, but only Kaz and I understood the script. Later, in the quiet of the back alley, the same alley where this had all begun, Kaz met me. The rain had started again, a soft, cleansing drizzle. He took the bait. I said, "They all did," Kaz confirmed, his voice low. "The Navarros will be busy chasing ghosts tomorrow night." He looked at me, his gaze serious. "What his phone tells you will be the nail, but getting your sister is the only thing that matters. The rest is just noise." We stood in the shared silence, the plan for the next night solidifying between us. A desperate, high-stakes gamble. "Tomorrow, Greco will think I am coming to the glass wing to bend the knee," Kaz said, his voice hard as steel. "A gesture of tribute to the Navarros, to buy peace. And I'll be on the inside," I added, my own resolve hardening. "I'll use the access card data from Greco's phone to create a new profile. Event logistics. It will get me on board, it will get me to Maeve." Our goals were perfectly aligned, a dual-pronged attack. He would draw the fire, the public face of the operation. I would be the ghost in the machine, moving unseen through the digital and physical corridors of the ship. We would save my sister, and we would bring the entire rotten structure of betrayal crashing down. The performance had to be perfect. It had to be loud, public, and brutal. The eyes and ears of Silas Greco and the Navarro family were everywhere, and for our plan to work, they had to believe that Kaz Dovico and the meddling waitress were finished. They had to believe he was alone. We chose the lunch rush at Orfeo's. The room was full, the ambient noise a perfect backdrop. I was carrying a tray with a single glass of whiskey for table 17. Kaz was there, looking every inch the imperious crime boss, his face a thundercloud. He had been meticulously building the narrative all morning, making angry calls, his voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear snippets of his frustration over the botched job at the key. As I placed the glass on his table, I let my hand linger for a fraction of a second too long. A tiny, deliberate mistake. It was his cue. His hand shot out, not touching me but slamming the table. The whiskey glass jumped, spilling amber liquid across the polished mahogany. The entire restaurant flinched. "Incompetence," he roared, his voice a whip crack that silenced every conversation. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every eye was on us. I pay for perfection, and all I get are clumsy, careless mistakes. I am surrounded by fools. His rage felt utterly real, a terrifying force of nature. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a cold fire. A dismissal so complete it felt like a physical blow. My heart was pounding, but I held his gaze. I let the entire room see my defiance, the slight lift of my chin. I had to play my part. I was not a victim. I was a challenger. "Get out, nah," he snarled. "You're fired. I don't want to see your face in here again." The room held its breath. This was the critical moment. I let a beat of silence pass, allowing the tension to coil to its breaking point. Then I delivered my line, my voice as cold and steady as it was the first time. "Check your phone." A collective gasp went through the room. It was an act of open rebellion, of insanity. Kaz stared at me, his expression a mask of fury. He snatched his phone from the table. On the screen was the message I had sent him 30 seconds before, a carefully fabricated piece of intelligence. A fake shipping manifest pointing to a Val di Pietra warehouse on the other side of town as the receiving point for a major Navarro transaction. It was a lie designed to be discovered, a piece of bait for Greco's spies. It made me look like a double agent, and it made Kaz look like a fool who had been betrayed by a nobody. It was perfect. He looked up from the phone, and the look he gave me was one of pure venom. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the restaurant, his men scrambling to follow. I stood there for a moment, the focal point of 100 shocked and pitying stares. Then I untied my apron, laid it on the table, and walked out. My head held high, to the world. We were broken. We were enemies. 20 minutes later, in the damp, quiet confines of the restaurant's wine cellar, the truth was different. We met in the narrow aisle between racks of priceless vintages. The air was cool and smelled of earth and fermented grapes. He was there, waiting in the shadows. We didn't speak. There was no time, and words were useless anyway. He simply reached out and took my hand. His grip was crushingly tight, a silent, desperate message. "Be safe. Come back." I squeezed back, my own silent promise. "I will. You too." The contact lasted for a single, frantic heartbeat. Then he was gone, a ghost slipping out the cellar's delivery entrance. The fallout was immediate and exactly as we'd planned. By nightfall, the whispers were all over the city. Kazdovico had lost his touch. He'd been played by a waitress. His organization was in turmoil. The fake manifest I'd sent him was leaked. And as expected, the Navarro family took the bait. Kaz's men reported that Navarro enforcers were massing near the decoy warehouse, preparing for a raid. The path to the eastward pier, to the glass wing, was being cleared for us. My own infiltration was a blur of focused, high-speed work, using the complete data clone from Greco's phone. I built myself a new identity. Jenna Michaels, freelance event logistics coordinator, recently contracted by Echelon. I had his internal contact lists, his security clearance codes, even the specific formatting of their temporary ID cards. I spent hours in a small print shop in the bad part of town, laminating the card, embedding a cloned RFID chip. By the time I was done, My fake identity was more real than Echelon's own records. A new message on my burner phone pulled my attention. It wasn't from Kaz. The source was routed through a server owned by the Metropolitan Integrity Commission. It was a warning. FOCB case file on Valdipietra has been compromised. Data is being manipulated. Aegis Task Force is not secure. It confirmed our worst fears. Greco had an accomplice deep inside the federal task force assigned to take him down. Another message followed moments later, from a different, untraceable source. It was cryptic. Don't trust anyone in a navy blue suit. It was an odd detail, but my research on the FOCB had included internal dress code protocols. Navy blue suits were the informal uniform of the Aegis Task Force. I had a mole, an ally, somewhere inside the system, feeding me life-saving information. At the same time, Kaz received his own warning. One of his dock contacts, an old man who had been loyal to his father, sent word. A man had been seen setting up on the roof of a warehouse overlooking the pier where the glasswing was docked. He had a long rifle case, a sniper. Greco wasn't just planning to have Kaz arrested, he was planning to have him executed, making it look like a casualty in a federal raid. The decision was instant and absolute. Kaz called off his men. He would be walking onto that ship alone. It was the only way to ensure his men didn't walk into a massacre. I stood in the staff locker room of the glasswing, the low thrum of the yacht's engines a constant vibration in the soles of my feet. I was dressed in the Echelon uniform dark blue trousers, a crisp white shirt, a jacket identical to the one Maeve wore in the photograph. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I was no longer a waitress or a student. I was a weapon, calibrated and aimed. As I turned to leave, a line of volunteers was being led down the narrow corridor. They were all young, all bright-eyed, all wearing the same uniform. And for a split second, through the reflection in a polished brass porthole, my eyes met hers. Maeve. She was thinner, her face pale, the forced smile from the photo now a look of tired resignation. But it was her. Our gazes locked for a single, shattering moment. I saw the flash of recognition, of shock, in her eyes. My heart screamed her name. I wanted to run to her, to hold her, to pull her out of that line and away from this nightmare. But I couldn't. Not yet. A guard nudged her forward, and she was gone, swept away by the current. I was left with her ghost in the reflection, my own face a mask of cold fury. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. I began to move through the ship, my event staff credentials giving me access to almost every level. I wasn't just looking for Maeve. I was memorizing the ship's layout, noting every exit, every security camera, every fire suppression panel. My mind was building a three-dimensional map, a schematic for our survival. I was in a service corridor on the main deck when I heard voices from a nearby storage closet. Greco's voice, low and sharp. The NFC chip on the dessert plate was a nice touch. Clever, but sloppy. A wave of ice water washed through me. He knew. Find the waitress, Michaels, or whatever she's calling herself now. She's on board. When the auction is over and our guest of honor is taken care of. I want her gone. No witnesses, just a tragic accident. My time was up. I was no longer the hunter. I was the hunted. I found a quiet alcove, my back pressed against the cool bulkhead, and pulled out my phone. My fingers were trembling, but I forced them still. There was only one thing left to say, one final promise to make before the world exploded. I typed 2 words. Survive, then talk. I pressed send. A moment later, a reply came back from Kaz. A perfect echo. Survive, then talk. I closed my eyes, my heart a clenched fist in my chest. The game was over. The battle was about to begin. The glasswing pulled away from the pier like a phantom, its white hull slipping through the black water with barely a whisper. The storm that had been threatening all day was finally rolling in from the sea, the sky a bruised purple, the wind beginning to keen. On the decks, strings of golden lights were strung between the masts, casting shimmering, coin-like reflections on the wet, polished wood. To the casual observer, It was the picture of nautical elegance. To me, it was a cage. I moved through the ship's opulent main salon, a flute of champagne in my hand, a prop. My suit was Italian, impeccably tailored, the costume of a man with more money than sense. I was part of a small, somber delegation, a public display of my surrender to the Navarro line. Men I despised greeted me with false smiles, clapping me on the shoulder. I smiled back, playing the part of the defeated leader. But beneath the facade, my senses were screaming. Every man was a potential threat, every shadow a potential ambush point. My eyes swept the room not for friendly faces, but for firing angles, for the subtle bulge of a weapon under a jacket, for the way a man stood that told me he was more than a simple guest. I saw Greco across the room, holding court, basking in his victory. He met my eyes and gave me a small, triumphant nod. The fool. He thought he was the predator. He didn't realize he was already in the trap. The main event began. It wasn't a public auction with a fast-talking auctioneer. It was silent, digital, and discreet. The charity part was a joke. The items on display, rare art. Exclusive vacation packages were just placeholders. The real transactions were for Echelon's human inventory. Each VIP wore a small, elegant earpiece, through which a moderator would read coded lot numbers and receive whispered bids. It was clean, untraceable, and utterly monstrous. I stood near the back, watching, waiting for Jenna's signal, feeling the low thrum of the ship's engines and the rising fury of the storm outside. The ship began to rock, a gentle sway at first that grew more pronounced as we moved into open, unprotected water. Greco was using the storm as cover, pushing the ship into a shipping lane where we would be just another vessel fighting the waves, invisible to the port authority. It was a smart move, but he had no idea what kind of storm was about to break inside his own party. My station was a small audio-visual control booth overlooking the main salon. From here, a single technician managed the discreet broadcast to the VIP earpieces. He was a skinny kid who looked more interested in the game on his phone than the millions of dollars being traded a few feet away. It took me less than 3 minutes to get him out of the room. A faked emergency text from his girlfriend about a fire in her apartment, sent from a spoofed number, was all it took. He was gone in a flash, barely remembering to lock the door, which was no obstacle at all. I sat down at his console. My world narrowed to lines of code on the screen. I had less than 5 minutes before he came back or someone got suspicious. I found their audio stream a simple, low-security frequency. It was insultingly easy, pathetic. These men dealt in human lives but protected their communications with the digital equivalent of a chain-link fence. I patched my own server into the broadcast relay. In my hand, I held a small, powerful transmitter. On my laptop were the files I had spent months compiling audio clips from Greco's cloned phone of him making deals, video snippets from Echelon's own security archives showing the volunteers being herded into shipping containers, encrypted ledgers I had cracked that detailed the payments. It was time to burn it all down. I took a deep breath and flipped the switch. Across the salon, the quiet, orderly bidding process devolved into chaos. I saw men and women in $1,000 suits rip the earpieces from their ears, their faces masks of shock and horror. Instead of the calm, modulated voice of the auctioneer, they were hearing the terrified sobs of a young woman, the cold, callous voice of Greco arranging a price, the clanging of a container door slamming shut. The quiet hum of the party was replaced by a rising tide of panicked whispers. "What is this? Where is this coming from?" Security guards, their faces grim and confused, began to move through the crowd, speaking into their radios. The broadcast signal was a ghost they couldn't catch. The chaos was my cover. Now for Maeve. I moved through the service corridors, a ghost in the ship's guts. The schematics I had memorized led me to the theater and stage production area on a lower deck. It was dark and quiet, a maze of props and scenery. I found the storage room Greco's men were using as a holding cell. The door was locked with a heavy magnetic seal. I bypassed it by pulling a fire alarm panel on the wall and shorting the backup battery connection. killing the power to the lock for a crucial 3 seconds. Maeve was inside, sitting on a pile of dusty velvet curtains. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear, then with dawning recognition. There was no time for a tearful reunion. "Jenna, how?" "No time," and I said, my voice low and urgent. "We have to go, now." Her hands were bound in front of her with a pair of sleek, black cuffs, no keyhole. I recognized the design from a Security Expo catalog, magnetic release, requiring a specific, high-powered key, a key I didn't have. I looked around frantically. My eyes landed on a heavy, ornamental necklace I was wearing as part of my disguise, made of a powerfully magnetized metallic alloy, a long shot. I pressed the clasp of the necklace against the seam of the cuffs. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a soft, satisfying click, the cuffs sprang open. "Come on," I whispered, grabbing her hand. "We couldn't go back the way I came. I needed a bigger diversion." From my pocket, I pulled a small device, a remote signal spoofer. I aimed it at a smoke detector in the corridor and pressed the button. Instantly, the ship's fire alarms began to blare, a deafening, piercing shriek, accompanied by flashing strobe lights. Doors opened, and the panicked crowd from the auction began to pour into the main stairwells, a human tide of confusion. They were all moving away from the supposed fire, clearing the central staircase. Creating the exact escape route I needed, I pulled Maeve into the stream of bodies, and we let the current carry us upward. The moment the alarms went off, I knew it was Jenna. The chaos in the salon was her symphony. Greco's face was a mask of disbelief turning to murderous rage as he realized what was happening. He barked orders into his radio, his eyes scanning the crowd, looking for her. This was my moment. I left the salon, moving against the flow of panicked guests, heading down toward the heart of the ship, toward the engine room. I knew that's where he would go. When your house is on fire, you run to the vault. The engine room was his last bastion of control. I found him there, surrounded by the deafening roar of the massive diesel engines. The air was hot, thick with the smell of fuel. He stood on a narrow catwalk, a pistol in his hand. He wasn't surprised to see me. "You!" he spat, his voice barely audible over the noise. "I should have known you didn't have the stomach to go clean. You couldn't resist one last fight." "Whoa, this isn't a fight, Silas," I shouted back, my own weapon in my hand. "It's pest control." The word betrayal was a cold, heavy weight in my throat. 15 years of shared meals, of trust, of watching each other's backs, all of it a lie. He laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "You still don't get it, do you? Kaz, you're a dinosaur. Your time is over. The future isn't about loyalty, it's about leverage." He gestured vaguely upwards. "You think you've won. You think exposing this little operation matters. I have protection you can't even dream of. Your friends in the FOCB, the Aegis Task Force. I have one of their senior agents on my payroll. If you shoot me, you're not a vigilante. You're a mob boss killing a federal informant. You'll be a monster on the 11 o'clock news. And I'll be a hero." His final card, the ace up his sleeve. He had made himself untouchable. Checkmate. At that exact moment, a massive bolt of lightning lit the sky outside a porthole, followed an instant later by a deafening crack of thunder. The ship, caught by a rogue wave in the heart of the storm, lurched violently. The steel deck plates groaned, and the world tilted sideways. I was thrown off balance, my feet slipping on a patch of oil. My back slammed against the safety railing, the metal bar bending under my weight. For a horrifying second, I was looking down into the churning, mechanical guts of the engine, my grip on the railing failing. Greco raised his pistol, a triumphant smirk on his face. Then, a figure slammed into him from the side. Jenna. She drove her shoulder hard into his chest, sending his shot wide, the bullet ricocheting harmlessly off a steel bulkhead. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled toward me, her face a mask of fierce determination, her hand grabbing the front of my jacket. Her arm was trembling, but her grip was like steel. She pulled, using all of her weight, and it was just enough for me to find my footing again on the swaying deck. Maeve was already running, disappearing down a service ladder, just as I had instructed her. Greco, seeing his opportunity, shoved Jenna aside and scrambled for a rope ladder that was hanging from an open maintenance hatch. By the time I recovered, he was already over the side, a sleek black speedboat appearing from the storm to whisk him away into the roaring darkness. He was gone. "Let's go," I roared, moving to pursue him. "We can't let him get away." Jenna grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "No," she yelled over the scream of the engines and the storm. "Not now, he's a ghost. We need the body." She looked at me, her eyes clear and focused amidst the chaos. "He thinks he's untouchable because he's an informant. We don't need him dead. Kaz, we need him alive, on a witness stand." We hit the shore not with the wail of sirens, but with the quiet, efficient hum of a Metropolitan Integrity Commission patrol boat. The city lights of Rivermount were a distant, hazy promise as we stepped onto the solid ground of the MIK's private dock. Maeve was beside me, wrapped in a thick blanket, her hand gripping mine with a strength that belied her fragile appearance. Kaz moved with a grim purpose, his face set like stone, his men securing the perimeter with a silent professionalism that was more unnerving than any overt threat. An older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor met us. Commissioner Davies. She was the head of the MIC, and the one person in the city Kaz seemed to trust. "Jenna Rourke?" she asked, her gaze skipping over Kaz to land on me. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "I believe you have something for us." I pulled the encrypted hard drive from my pocket. It felt impossibly heavy. It held months of my life, hours of sleepless nights, and the digital ghosts of countless victims. It was everything. I placed it in her outstretched hand. "It's all there," I managed to say. Echelon, the cargo union, the shipping routes, everything. Just as Davies secured the drive in a sealed evidence bag, 2 black sedans with government plates screeched to a halt at the end of the pier. Men in dark suits spilled out, their movements aggressive, proprietary. FOCB, and leading them, a man with a square jaw and cold, empty eyes. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. The warning from my anonymous source echoed in my head. Don't trust anyone in a navy blue suit. "Commissioner," the agent said, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "This is a federal crime scene. We'll be taking the evidence. And Mr. Dovico." Davies didn't flinch. "Agent Thorne, your jurisdiction ends where this pier begins. This is an MIC matter now. You're welcome to file a complaint." Thorne's eyes narrowed. He was a man used to getting his way. He was Greco's ace in the hole, the institutional power that made him feel untouchable. I could see it in the arrogant set of his shoulders. He was the one who had been manipulating the case from the inside, protecting Greco, likely planning to seize all the evidence tonight and bury it forever. I saw the trap closing around us. The FOCB would stonewall. The evidence would vanish into a bureaucratic black hole. Greco would walk. It was at that moment that Kaz made his move. He stepped forward, placing himself between me and the federal agents. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was changing the entire game. From my perspective, the path forward was a dead end. The FOCB, my supposed allies, were compromised. Greco was in the wind, the board was frozen, but Jenna's hard drive, now in the hands of the MIC, was a new piece, a queen, and I knew how to use it. "Agent Thorne," I said, my voice calm, carrying across the damp night air. "You want my cooperation, you'll get it. In public." I turned to Commissioner Davies. "I'm formally requesting the MIC open a public municipal hearing on the activities of the North Atlantic Cargo Union and its ties to the Echelon Wellness Foundation." A stunned silence fell over the pier. Even Davies looked surprised. Thorne's face went rigid. A public hearing was his worst nightmare. It meant cameras, reporters, public scrutiny. It meant the evidence couldn't be quietly lost. "On what grounds?" Thorne snapped. "On the grounds of my testimony," I said, "and as a gesture of good faith, I will provide the Commission with a lifetime's worth of documentation. Every ledger, every shipping manifest, every payoff associated with the cargo union's illegal operations since my father's time. I will deliver my entire kingdom to your doorstep. Commissioner? I paused, letting the weight of my offer sink in. In exchange, I want limited transactional immunity for past offenses, and I want a subpoena for Silas Greco and every member of the Echelon Board. I was burning my own history to the ground. I was sacrificing the legacy of my family, the very foundation of my power, to buy one clean shot at the man who had betrayed me. It was then that Maeve, my quiet, traumatized sister, spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "I'll testify too," she said. All eyes turned to her. I wasn't just a volunteer. They made me an assistant in their fundraising office for the last 2 months. She reached into the pocket of the jacket she was wearing and pulled out a small, digital audio recorder. I have recordings of every planning meeting, of Greco talking with Echelon's director. I have their entire playbook on tape. She wasn't just a victim. She was a witness, a mole, like sister. The look on Agent Thorne's face was a beautiful thing to behold. It was the look of a man watching his carefully constructed world catch fire. The adrenaline that had kept me going for 2 straight days finally abandoned me in a sterile, white corridor of the MIC headquarters. The world started to tilt, the fluorescent lights overhead blurring into long, smeared lines, the sounds of agents talking, phones ringing. All of it faded into a dull, distant roar. My legs gave out. Before I could fall, strong arms were around me. Kaz. He half lifted, half guided me to a quiet alcove, away from the prying eyes. He leaned me against the cool wall, his hands on my shoulders, steadying me. The sheer, bone-deep exhaustion was overwhelming. I had found Maeve. The goal that had driven me for months was accomplished, and in its place, there was just a vast, empty space. He saw it in my eyes, and he didn't say anything. He just pulled me into his arms, his hand coming up to cradle the back of my head. I collapsed against his chest, my face buried in the rough fabric of his coat. It smelled of the sea and the storm. He just held me, his presence a solid, unshakable wall against the chaos. "It's over. Jenna," he murmured into my hair, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "The running part is over." I looked up at him, my vision blurry with unshed tears, the play at the restaurant firing me. He rested his forehead against mine, his gaze intense, unwavering. No more stage plays, he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. No more walking away, not ever again. The counterattack came the next morning. Greco, wherever he was hiding, was not idle. He launched a media blitz. My face was suddenly on every news channel, a grainy photo from my Orfeos staff file. I was the disgruntled waitress, the gold-digging opportunist who had tried to blackmail the venerable Kazdovico. He was painted as the victim, a respected businessman fighting off a hostile takeover by the Navarro family, betrayed by a scheming employee. It was a masterful piece of fiction, and the city was eating it up. The MIC started getting threats, anonymous calls, vandalism at their downtown office, a brick through a window. The political pressure was immense. One of the city commissioners on the oversight board, a man with deep ties to Greco's associates, began making moves to have the hearing shut down before it even started, citing unreliable witnesses and lack of credible evidence. That's when I went back to work. From the sanctuary of my small apartment with Maeve asleep in the next room, I logged into the MIC's public citizen tip line. It was a secure, anonymous portal for reporting corruption. It was also a back door. I wasn't breaking in. I was using their own system against them. I cross-referenced the compromised commissioner's financial disclosures with the offshore banking information I'd pulled from Greco's phone, and there it was. A string of shell corporations, a series of untraceable payments, a direct digital trail of breadcrumbs leading from Greco's dirty money right into the commissioner's blind trust. I packaged the data, encrypted it, and submitted it through the very portal I had just exploited, an anonymous tip that would force the MIC to investigate its own. The Aegis task force tried a different tactic. Agent Thorne and 2 of his men showed up at Kaz's penthouse. They didn't have a warrant, they had a threat. They offered him a deal. Hand over all his data on the Navarros, become their confidential informant, and they would make his legal troubles disappear. They wanted to absorb his operation, not dismantle it. Kaz met them in his lobby. He stood there, in a simple shirt and trousers, and refused. He told them that any talking he had to do would be in a public hearing room, not in a dark car in a parking garage. He was choosing the light. He was choosing my way. That night, he came to my apartment. He didn't come inside. Maeve and I held each other on the sofa, watching a stupid movie, trying to feel normal for a few hours. But I knew he was there. I could feel his presence. When I looked out the peephole, I saw him, leaning against the wall at the far end of the hallway, a silent, solitary guardian. He was there all night. I woke up at dawn and looked again, and he was still there, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, but his posture unwavering. He was keeping us safe. He was keeping his promise. I opened the door, and he looked startled, as if pulled from a trance. "The hearing is today," I said softly. He nodded, pushing himself off the wall. "My suit is pressed. I'm ready." He looked down at his hands, then back at me. He was ready for a war. "Kaz," I said, and he met my eyes. "Tomorrow, at the hearing. Don't bring a gun. Bring me." A slow understanding dawned in his eyes. He wasn't going to win this with bullets or intimidation. This new war was fought with truth, with data, with exposure. I was his best weapon now. He gave a single, slow nod. He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek for a fleeting second. "Okay, Jenna," he said, "okay." Then he turned and walked away, back in his penthouse. I knew his suit would be hanging, ready, and on the polished surface of his bedside table, his pistol would be lying there, not in his pocket, not in his waistband. It would be on the table. He had made his choice. The hearing room at the Metropolitan Integrity Commission was a tinderbox. Every seat was taken. The press corps was a restless animal, a creature of 1,000 lenses and microphones, crammed along the walls. The public gallery was a sea of faces, curious citizens, city power brokers, and I even recognized a few of the diners who had been at Orfeo's that first night, their expressions now a mixture of shock and fascination. I sat at a long table at the front, with Maeve on one side and Kaz on the other. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, but for the first time, he seemed unconcerned with the exits. He was facing the fire. The preliminary proceedings were a blur of legal jargon. Then, Greco's lawyer, a man with a predatory smile and eyes like a shark, was given the floor to make his opening statement. He walked directly toward me. "The commission is being asked to derail a federal investigation based on the word of a disgruntled fantasist waitress," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A young woman who, by all accounts, became obsessed with my client's associate, Mr. Dovico, and concocted this elaborate story for personal gain and attention." The room erupted in a low murmur. I felt a hot flush of anger creep up my neck. Beside me, under the table, Kaz's hand found mine. His grip was firm, a silent, steady anchor in the churning sea of lies. I took a deep breath, and the anger receded, replaced by a cold, clear focus. I squeezed his hand once, then let go. I stood up. The room fell silent. I didn't look at Greco's lawyer. I didn't look at the press. I looked directly at the compromised city commissioner, the one whose accounts I had traced, the one whose career was about to end. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud, but it filled the cavernous room. It was the same voice I had used in the restaurant, a voice stripped of all emotion, leaving only the hard, undeniable truth. Play the recording. A ripple of confusion went through the room. The commissioner I was staring at went pale. Commissioner Davies, at the head of the panel, gave a single, sharp nod to her aide. The large screens behind the panel, which had been displaying the MIC seal, flickered to life. But there was no video, only audio. The first voice was Greco's, slick and confident. "The transfer manifest is clean. labeled as therapeutic equipment. We moved the volunteers to the glass wing, and from there, they're just cargo. The second voice was colder, more bureaucratic. Agent Thorne, the man in the navy blue suit, and my fee. Greco's voice again, the usual. It's already been routed through the same shell corporation we use for the port official. The transaction code is 7B Delta. The beneficiary account is listed as a charitable trust. Sound familiar. A collective gasp swept through the hearing room. It was all there. The cold, hard mechanics of their operation, the casual discussion of human lives, the direct link between a supposed federal agent and the man he was supposed to be investigating. The room exploded into a roar of overlapping conversations, of reporters shouting into their phones. Agent Thorne, who was standing near the back wall, made a move for the door, but he was suddenly surrounded by two of his own FOCB agents, men in gray suits. Not navy blue, their faces grim. They had been given their orders. Greco's federal shield had just shattered. My world had been a fortress, built of secrets and shadows. Now, I was tearing it down, stone by stone, in the brightest light imaginable. When the recording played, when I saw the look of utter betrayal on Thorne's face as his own people cuffed him, I felt no triumph, only a grim, weary finality. This was the end of the old world. Commissioner Davies banged her gavel, her voice cutting through the noise. In light of this new evidence, and in conjunction with Mr. Dovaco's offer of cooperation, the MIC is officially granting him limited transactional immunity. She looked directly at me. Mr. Dovaco, the commission accepts your terms. I stood up. From my inside pocket, I produced not a weapon, but a small, ornate key. I walked to the evidence table and placed it down with a soft click. It was the key to a private, hidden safe in Geneva. The safe that held 50 years of my family's secrets. The key to my cage. I had just handed it over. Greco knew it was over. While the room was still in chaos, while his lawyer was sputtering in protest, he made a break for it, slipping out a side door that led to the private parking garage. But Jenna and Maeve were already moving. They didn't shout. They simply pointed, guiding a team of MIC security with a calm, deadly precision. I followed, not running, but walking with a deliberate, measured pace. I met him on the steep concrete ramp of the garage. Halfway between the light of the hearing room and the darkness of the street, he was cornered, his chest heaving, his face a mask of desperation and hatred. "You should have shot me on the boat! Kaz," he screamed, his voice echoing in the enclosed space. "You don't have the guts to finish this the old way." He was right. I stopped a few feet from him. There was no gun in my hand. There was nothing but the vast, empty space left by 15 years of lies. "Every empire has its last day, Silas," I said, my voice quiet, devoid of anger. "You chose today." Behind him, the MIC guards closed in. The only sound was the cold, metallic click of the handcuffs as they locked around his wrists. We stepped out onto the broad marble steps of the MIC building, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt the sun on my face. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky so blue and clean it looked like freshly washed glass. Maeve was on one side of me, her arm linked through mine. Kaz was on the other, standing tall, his face turned toward the clamoring press, no longer seeking the shadows, the Navarro Alliance, deprived of its key partner and facing public disgrace, was already beginning to fracture. Echelon's assets were frozen, its board members arrested. It was over. Amidst the flashing cameras and shouted questions, Kaz leaned in close, his voice a low whisper meant only for me. "I survived," he said, his breath warm against my ear. "Now we talk." 6 months later, Kaz Dovaco officially dissolved the Val di Pietra organization. In its place, he founded the Rivermount Meridian Logistics Company. It was clean, fully audited by the MIC, and surprisingly successful. He was a brilliant strategist, and it turned out his skills were just as effective in a boardroom as they were in a back alley. I went back to school, but I also founded something of my own, Beacon Labs, a small, non-profit consultancy that used data analysis and ethical hacking to help track victims of trafficking rings and expose corrupt shell corporations. Maeve was my first employee. We were taking the darkness we had endured and turning it into a light for others. For our anniversary, the 6-month anniversary of the day our worlds truly collided, we went back to Orpheo's. The restaurant was the same, the lighting still low, the cellist still playing Bach, but we were different. We didn't take table 17. Instead, we chose a small, intimate booth near the open kitchen, where the light was warm and we could see the flames dance in the hearth. Kaz leaned back, a slow, playful smile on his face. He looked at me, his eyes full of a light I never thought I'd see. "I have to admit," he said, his voice a low, teasing rumble, "I'm a little nervous. If I complain about the food again—" I laughed, a real unburdened laugh. I leaned across the table, resting my forehead against his. "If you do," I whispered, "I'll only have to say 3 words." He closed his eyes, a soft smile on his lips, and as he leaned in to kiss me, slowly, tenderly, amidst the familiar, comforting clatter of plates and quiet conversation, we said them together, a shared whisper, a final promise. Play the recording. It was no longer a weapon. It was our story. The quiet, permanent reminder that truth, our truth, was the only power that mattered. Thank you so much for listening to our story tonight. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. Remember to subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, like this video. And if you'd like to offer some extra support, hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people. Your support means the world.